First of all, I want to thank the Tribal Law and Policy Institute for inviting me to share a few words with you this evening. I'm going to talk about heroes tonight because a lot of what we do here is hard work, and it can be demoralizing. And so I want to celebrate our work and celebrate our heroes in this work. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about my first major hero in the victim rights movement. As Bonnie mentioned, I started out as an undergraduate as a volunteer rape crisis advocate when I was just 20 years old and I was in college. So one of the early lessons, of course, as you start being an advocate for the first time is that you can really quickly burn out. I know a lot of you know that. We end up seeing some of the worst things that humans can do to each other. And we see how some human beings, for whatever reason, have made the decision to violate another person. And we try to pick up the pieces, right, of these incidents. And the memories of how these victims have suffered can sometimes really burn in our memories. So we often talk about things like vicarious trauma, secondary trauma, burnout, self-care, right? We talk about helping the helper so that victim advocates have a safe place to find help themselves. And so many victim advocates are survivors of crime themselves. And so oftentimes they're doing double duty, dealing with your own trauma and then dealing with the trauma of the victims that you serve. So I want to turn our attention to more uplifting matters. How do we keep our spirits happy? How do we make sure that our focus on trauma does not begin to define our very lives? How do we balance the hard, painful work with the pleasant and happy things in our lives? For me and for many people that I know, we turn to each other when these struggles are happening. We find strength in the people around us, and we draw courage from seeing how communities stand up and say no more when violence occurs. So tonight I want to talk about heroes. How many of you have a hero in your life? Show of hands. If you don't have one, you should find one, right? Heroes are so important. In the victims' rights movement, we see the worst in people, and so it's really imperative that we find the best in people. Now, the dictionary definition of a hero is a person who is admired or idealized for courage, outstanding achievements, or noble qualities. So I was preparing for tonight's speech. I thought back on my life and where I found my own heroes. Sometimes you find heroes in really unexpected places. But the first person who was my hero in the victims' rights movement was a woman named Sarah Jane. Sarah Jane was the director of the Rape Crisis Center and was the person who trained me to be a victim advocate long before I went to law school. So I went through a 40-hour training program. A lot of you have probably either been through a 40-hour training program or provided the 40-hour training program. And through that process, I learned the ins and outs of expectations for victim advocates. Now, she had been working with the program since the mid-1970s, and so I was really in awe of her strength and her tenacity. So one of the rules about our victims advocacy program where I volunteered was that we had to shadow an experienced advocate at a hospital call before we would go on a hospital call on our own, right? So one night, about 3 a.m, Sarah Jane called me and said, "We've got a hospital call. Are you available to come and learn about what it's like so you can do this on your own in the future?" So I said yes, and I drove to the hospital in the middle of the night to learn about how to be a victim advocate at the hospital. Now, in this case, a young woman had been assaulted at a party, and her 3 friends had brought her to the emergency room, but the survivor was not sure that she wanted to report the crime. A nurse took her back to an exam room, and we all waited in the waiting room because she wanted some privacy. About 15 minutes later, the survivor returned to the waiting room and said that she wanted to leave the hospital and did not want to make a report. So at that moment, I wasn't sure what the role of an advocate should be. Should we try to persuade her to stay and get the exam and make the report, or should we support her decision to leave? And what should we tell the hospital, right? And that's when Sarah Jane showed me what it looks like to be a true advocate. Without hesitating, She said to this survivor, "You are in charge." And she honored that young woman by immediately supporting her decision with no hesitation. And as I watched the dynamic unfold before me, I learned a valuable lesson. You see, what Sarah Jane demonstrated to me is that restoring dignity is the one true role of an advocate. And that since so much had already been taken from this young woman, we honored her by respecting her decision without any reservation. So we supported this young woman and left the hospital because that is what she wanted to do. So a few weeks later, I received a call at home, again in the middle of the night, about 3 a.m, that there was a rape victim at the hospital and that law enforcement had requested an advocate. So I was a little nervous about this because I felt like, well, I didn't really actually get to see a whole hospital call because this survivor the few weeks before had left the hospital. And so I didn't know if I was really allowed to do this call. So I called Sarah Jane at 3 a.m. That's when we do a lot of our work, right? At 3 a.m. And I woke her up and I told her that there was a hospital call and asked if she could meet me at the hospital. And even though I had been really fully trained and ready to be an advocate, I was really uncertain about whether I should go alone. And I'll never forget the words that she said to me that night. She was really tired and a little cranky, but what she said to me was, "Sarah, what is it about this that you think you cannot do? What is it about this that you think you cannot do?" And in that moment, she gave me the dignity to trust myself as an advocate. She demonstrated her faith in me, a simple 20-year-old volunteer with very little experience. And she pushed me, and she encouraged me. And in the end, she taught me everything that I know about advocacy for victims of crime. And so Sarah Jane is probably my foremost hero in this work. And even though we don't live in the same state anymore, that connection and that bond that we share is so deep and profound, and I will never forget her words. What is it about this that you think you cannot do? Now, I know most of you have your own story about how you came to this work. And so I ask one thing for you. When you return home from this amazing conference, make that phone call. Reach out to that hero who guided you through this difficult work that we all do. Your mentor, your boss, your friend, who gave you the strength to work for justice. Heroes come in all shapes and sizes and forms from all different parts of our lives. So I just want to point out a few heroes in our audience here. Can we have a show of hands and applause? How many law enforcement officers are here in the room with us today? Law enforcement. Without our law enforcement officers, without your dedication and courage, our movement to protect victims would have no traction at all. We know that your work is often unappreciated. You risk your lives to ensure that our communities are safe. Heroes, one and all. Let me ask how many judges we have in the room. Judges? Tribal court judges, state court judges? Woo! You are tasked with making difficult life and death decisions about how to resolve painful disputes, and too often we take you for granted. So let me just say thank you for your heroic work. Prosecutors, where are prosecutors in the room? Thank you. Thank you for what you do. How about therapists, drug and alcohol counselors, psychologists? Let's give you a big round of applause. You see, this whole room is full of heroes. Each of you is a hero to someone, And on those days when this work seems unbearably difficult and painful, I hope you can remember this evening and celebrate the good in people all around us. Recently, I found myself a new hero. I found her on Facebook. You can find heroes on Facebook. She is an example of how one person can truly make a difference, and that is why she inspires me. Her name is Marita Growing Thunder. She is a native high school student from the Flathead Indian Reservation in western Montana. How many of you have heard of Marita? A few of you have? Thanks. She started a project called Save Our Sisters as a result of attending the Center for Creative Youth Art program. She makes and wears regalia on a daily basis to raise awareness of missing and murdered Indigenous women across the world. Growing Thunder posts these photographs of many of the dresses on a Facebook page called Save Our Sisters, hashtag MMIW awareness. So I found out about Marita on Facebook, and then I started doing a little research on her. And she's been featured in many newspapers, actually, and I found this article from the Missoulian. And the reporter wrote that Growing Thunder goes to work on the dresses after she finishes her homework and chores after school, sometimes working until 2 a.m. And the sad thing is when she's done, she'll be tens of thousands of dresses short of having honored all of the Indigenous women who have gone missing or have been murdered. But she has plans after graduation to attend college and major in pre-med. But the most exciting part about sharing Marita Growing Thunder's work is that she is here with us this evening. So, please welcome one of my new heroes, and surely soon to be one of yours, Marita Growing Thunder.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. It's such an honor to be here. As to reiterate, I am Marita Growing Thunder, and I started the project Save Our Sisters. And today, I'm here in honor of the following women. Miss Deanne, July 1982 to October 2014. Raylyn Marie, June 1985 to November 2014. Lena Jean, January 14th, 1981 to February 2003. These women are the paradigm of missing and murdered Indigenous women and many more other women as well. Not only are these women, this is overwhelming. This is amazing. Thank you so much. These women, not only are these women represented by numbers, but they are the backbone of our community. Without women, creation will stop, and these women are beloved and missed, and what numbers fail to show is that they are human too. These women are mothers and sisters and aunties, people that we all look up to, and the thought of people not having that, the opportunity to share such a wonderful bond is heartbreaking. So I chose to dress like my grandmothers on a daily basis throughout my senior year because these women may have experienced their own, they have experienced oppression, which was brought on by colonialism throughout America. And so my art is that I've been making dresses on a daily basis for these women. And thank you so much for having me.